The restaurant shimmered like a jewel that night. Golden lights draped over mahogany tables, soft music hummed through the air, and the scent of rosemary and butter drifted from the kitchen. It was one of those places where people didn't just eat, they displayed their status. At the heart of this world stood Evan Brooks. His uniform was crisp, his expression calm, his presence quietly commanding. Most saw a waiter. Few knew the truth. "Excuse me," a woman's voice sliced through the low chatter. "Could we please get a real waiter?" Heads turned. Silverware froze midair. The woman, Clara Weston, leaned slightly across the white tablecloth, her tone soaked in disdain. The man beside her, Richard, didn't even glance at Evan. His cufflinks glinted under the chandelier as he adjusted them, muttering something about standards. Evan's hand tightened around the crystal water pitcher. He almost lost his grip when Clara deliberately brushed against him as she sat down. A stream of water spilled across the tablecloth, sparkling under the lights like broken glass. "Oh my," Clara said in mock alarm, pulling her handbag away as though it were silk near fire. "You've made quite a scene already, haven't you?" Evan set the pitcher down gently and pulled a napkin from his pocket. "My apologies, ma'am," he said, voice steady. "Allow me to fix that." But before he could, Richard lifted his hand sharply. "Is this what passes for service here?" His voice carried through the room like thunder. "We were told this was the finest restaurant in Boston." A few nearby guests exchanged glances. The jazz trio in the corner faltered mid-note. Even the air seemed to pause. Evan straightened. The spill had spread, yes, but not as far as their arrogance. "I assure you, sir," he began. "Don't bother." Richard cut him off, waving over the young hostess. "Maya, over here." Maya hurried forward, cheeks flushed. She'd only been on the job for 2 months. "Yes, Mr. Weston? We'll take a different server. Someone more suitable," Richard said, glancing toward another waiter. "Liam, a young white server busy at a nearby table. He seems experienced enough." Clara nodded as if sealing a deal. "We're close friends with Congressman Hale," she added pointedly. "I'm sure he wouldn't be pleased to hear about this kind of service." The words landed like slaps dressed in politeness. Evan didn't move. His fingers whitened against the pitcher handle, but his face stayed unreadable. Behind his calm eyes, calculations sparked. From the kitchen doorway, Chef Marisol Vega stepped out, tall and sharp-eyed, wiping her hands on a linen cloth. She caught Evan's glance and raised an eyebrow, silently asking, "Do you want me to intervene?" He gave a subtle nod. "Not yet." Maya looked torn but followed instructions. "I'm sorry, Evan," she whispered. "They're insisting." He smiled slightly. "I understand. Table 12 prefers someone else," she bit her lip. "You shouldn't have to." But Evan was already walking away, steady, unbroken. No one in the dining room knew that the waiter they'd just dismissed held a PhD in food science and an MBA in management. Or that for the past 6 weeks he'd been working undercover, collecting data on toxic behavior and luxury dining. Tonight, though, something about the Westons' cruelty hit differently. It wasn't just another data point, it was personal. As Liam took over the table, Evan stepped to the service station, opened his small black notebook, and quietly wrote, "Incident 52. Customer request for replacement server. Racial bias suspected." He paused, then wrote another line, "Maintain composure. Record everything." From the corner of his eye, he saw Maya apologizing again, her voice soft. They wanted Liam instead. "It's fine," Evan said. "Everyone reveals who they are when they think no one important is watching." Chef Marisol appeared beside him, lowering her voice. "That's the 5th one this week, isn't it?" He nodded. "The 50th in the past month," she frowned. "How much more of this are you willing to take?" "As long as it takes," Evan replied. "Change never happens from the sidelines." In the distance, Richard's booming laugh echoed across the dining room as Liam nervously stumbled through the wine list. Evan could see it coming. The boy's knowledge was paper-thin. The perfect storm was forming, and Evan Brooks was ready to face it head-on. Liam approached the Weston's table, his smile polite but shaky. "Good evening, I'm Liam, and I'll be your server tonight." Richard leaned back in satisfaction, folding his hands over his chest. "Now this is more like it." He gave a smug look toward the neighboring tables, making sure his voice carried. "Tell us about your best wines, young man. We're celebrating our anniversary, and I expect something special." Liam's throat bobbed. He had trained for weeks but had only memorized the basics. The restaurant's cellar held more than 600 labels, and his knowledge barely scratched the surface. He tried to recall the notes Evan had once taught him during a slow shift. We have some fine selections from Bordeaux and Napa Valley," he stammered, "and a few vintage Italian reds that pair nicely with—" Clara cut him off with an elegant but sharp wave. "We were hoping for something more distinctive. Don't you have a sommelier?" Liam flushed, glancing toward the service station. Evan stood there quietly, polishing silverware, his attention outwardly fixed on the cutlery but inwardly following every word. Within seconds, he made his decision. He scribbled something on a slip of paper, folded it, and handed it to Maya as she passed. "Give this to Liam," he murmured. Moments later, Liam opened the note, glanced at it, and nodded quickly. "I'd recommend the 2008 Chateau Bel Air from Saint-Emilion," he said, voice steady now. "It has a smooth body with dark cherry notes and a touch of smoke that pairs beautifully with beef." Richard lifted his brows, impressed. "Excellent choice." He accepted the first pour and took a sip. "You know your wines better than I thought." Liam smiled in relief. Across the room, Evan gave a single approving nod, but the night wasn't finished testing anyone. After their first bottle, the Westons' laughter grew louder, their remarks more entitled. They talked about business deals, senators, vacations in Lake Como, each word chosen to remind the room of their importance. Then came Richard's next demand. "Last month in New York," he said, swirling his glass, "the chef made us a butter-poached lobster with truffle cognac reduction. Can your kitchen recreate that tonight?" Liam froze. "Sir, I can check with Chef Vega, but I believe such dishes require advance notice for ingredients." "Advance notice?" Richard's voice cut through the jazz music. "We're paying customers. Call the manager. Or better yet, the owner." The dining room quieted again. Evan exhaled slowly. He had seen humiliation take many shapes, but watching it fall on someone else always stung worse. He slipped into the kitchen and found Marisol plating a sea bass. "The couple at 12 wants a lobster dish from Leclerc's winter menu," he said. "They're about to cause another scene." She blinked. "You know that recipe?" "I consulted on it 2 years ago," he replied. "I still have the notes." He handed her his phone, where he'd pulled up the exact preparation, butter temperature, reduction ratio, plating style. Marisol scanned it, then gave a small, tight smile. "You're impossible. I can do this." Minutes later, she walked out to the dining room herself, confidence radiating like heat. "Mr. and Mrs. Weston," she said warmly, "it would be our honor to prepare your requested dish this evening." Clara looked around triumphantly. "See?" she said loudly to another couple. "Sometimes you just have to ask the right way." Evan returned to the floor, making notes as he passed each table. The data mattered, but tonight the pattern forming before his eyes mattered more. The way arrogance spread like perfume, altering the air for everyone near it. He was mid-sentence in his notebook when a voice called across the room. "Evan Brooks? I thought that was you." Every head turned. A man in a tailored gray suit was approaching. Daniel Park, a well-known food critic. "Your keynote at the Global Hospitality Summit last year was phenomenal," he said, grasping Evan's hand. "Your paper on empathy and service changed how I write reviews." Liam's mouth fell open. The Westons looked on in confusion. "Thank you, Daniel," Evan said, calm but aware of the attention. "So what brings you here?" the critic asked. "Are you evaluating this place?" "Field research," Evan answered simply. "I'm studying staff-customer interactions." Before he could say more, Clara appeared, clutching her glass. "Excuse me," she said sweetly to Daniel, ignoring Evan entirely. "Aren't you the Daniel Park? I'd love your recommendations for Aspen next month." Daniel frowned slightly, glancing from her to Evan. "Actually, I was speaking with Dr. Brooks." Clara blinked. "Doctor?" Daniel nodded. "He's one of the country's leading consultants on hospitality culture. His research is reshaping the industry." Evan could feel the shift ripple through the room like a current. Maya's eyes widened. Liam straightened, shoulders back. Even guests at other tables paused to listen. Clara's smile faltered. She stepped back without another word. Evan gave Daniel a polite nod. "Let's catch up soon." As the critic returned to his seat, the restaurant's energy had transformed. Conversations lowered. Glances followed Evan's quiet movements. The same people who had overlooked him minutes earlier now whispered his name. But at table 12, the Weston's pride refused to yield. When their special dish finally arrived, a masterpiece of lobster and truffle beneath a glass dome, the surrounding tables applauded its beauty. Marisol had outdone herself. Richard took one bite, paused, and frowned. "This isn't quite right," he announced loudly. "The sauce is off. And the manager, where is he? We'd like to speak to him. Now." The manager, Michael Osei, approached with calm professionalism. "Is there an issue, sir?" "This entire evening has been disappointing," Richard complained. "We were given an inappropriate server. Our requests were delayed, and now this dish is wrong. We expect the entire meal to be complimentary." Michael listened, his expression steady. "I'm very sorry to hear that, sir." "No apologies," Richard snapped. "Just fix it. Remove the charge entirely." Behind him, Evan kept writing, each word deliberate. Michael noticed, gave a faint nod. An unspoken signal between them. Richard's eyes narrowed. "What's he doing? Is he writing about us?" Evan closed the notebook. "Every experience is data, sir. We study what happens, not just what's served." Clara's face flushed. "That's ridiculous. We want him gone now." Michael hesitated, but Evan had already turned toward the kitchen. The hum of conversation faded as he stepped through the swinging doors. Inside, the metallic clatter of pans and the steady hiss of burners replaced the elegant quiet outside. Marisol looked up. "You don't have to take this," she said quietly. "Everyone here knows who you are." Evan placed his notebook on the counter, pages filled with numbers and observations. 27 incidents of bias this month across 4 restaurants, he murmured. 60% of those staff quit within 2 weeks. Liam entered, breathless. "Dr. Brooks, they're demanding you be removed for the rest of the night." Evan nodded. Expected. He looked around at the team watching him, Maya, Marisol, Liam, Michael, all waiting to see what he would do next. "This isn't about punishment," he said. "It's about proof." And as the kitchen lights gleamed on the pages of his notebook, he realized the confrontation he'd been studying for months had finally arrived. He was done observing. It was time to act. Evan took a slow breath and stepped back toward the dining room. His footsteps echoed lightly across the hardwood floor, each one measured and deliberate. The energy in the restaurant had shifted. Whispers passed like a current through the crowd. Every gaze followed him as he approached table 12. Clara noticed him first. "We said we didn't want to be served by you," she snapped, her voice too loud for the quiet room. Evan stopped beside their table, posture calm. The polished notebook in his hand gleamed under the chandelier's glow. "You asked for someone else earlier," he said evenly. "But I believe there's something more important we need to discuss." Richard scoffed. "What could you possibly have to discuss with us? You're a waiter, not management." Michael, the manager, stepped forward. "Dr. Brooks has full operational authority tonight," he said clearly. "He's not just staff." Richard blinked. "Doctor?" "Yes," Evan replied, placing his notebook on the table and sitting across from them as if the seat had been waiting for him all night. "Dr. Evan Brooks. I hold a PhD in food science and an MBA from Yale. I'm also the founder of Brooks Consulting, a firm that transforms toxic restaurant cultures into places of respect and excellence." The room fell into a deep silence. Even the soft music had faded. Clara's lips parted slightly. Richard's jaw worked soundlessly. "For the last 6 weeks," Evan continued, "I've been working here undercover, documenting patterns of discrimination in high-end restaurants. Tonight you've provided me with a very clear example." Richard's face reddened. "This is absurd. You can't—" "Your words to the hostess were, 'We want someone more suitable for guests of our caliber,'" Evan said, his tone steady. "At that point you hadn't received any service, so your judgment couldn't have been based on performance." Across the dining room, other guests watched in rapt attention. Some discreetly raised phones, others leaned forward, drawn in by the quiet intensity of the scene. Clara's diamond bracelet trembled as she adjusted her glass. "We didn't mean it that way," she whispered. Evan opened his notebook, revealing pages of handwritten data. 47 similar incidents documented this month. In over 20% of them, guests requested a different server before even being greeted. The result? Staff of color leaving the hospitality industry at 3 times the rate of their white peers. Richard tried to regain control. We're paying customers. You can't lecture us. Evan's calm never wavered. You can leave if you'd like, he said. But understand something. Walking out would only add another mark to the data, another proof that some people refuse to confront their actions. Staying, however, could change something, for you and for everyone watching. Clara looked around the room. Every table was silent. Dozens of eyes were on them. She swallowed hard. We'll stay, she said finally, her voice low but steady. Evan nodded. Then let's continue. He stood and gestured for Maya and Liam. We'll do this properly. The next hour unfolded like a lesson written in motion. Evan personally oversaw every detail of their service, his movements precise, his demeanor kind, yet composed. He explained the dishes with depth and respect, connecting flavors to memories, textures to stories. This duck confit, he told them, is slow-cooked for 20 hours. It teaches patience. The flavors bloom only when time and care are allowed to do their work, much like understanding. Clara's eyes softened. She took a bite and said nothing, just listened. For the wine pairing, Evan poured carefully, the deep red glinting in the glass. This vintage, he said, comes from a vineyard in Bordeaux, owned by 3 generations of the same family. They nearly lost everything after facing bankruptcy, but rebuilt with persistence. Sometimes resilience tastes like this, quiet but lasting. Richard hesitated before sipping. Then he nodded. That's incredible. Evan smiled faintly. I'm glad you think so. As the meal went on, something shifted. The arrogance that had once filled the air began to dissolve, replaced by curiosity. Clara asked about flavor balance. Richard asked how service training worked. They were no longer posturing, they were listening. When dessert arrived, Evan placed it gently in front of them, a deconstructed apple tart with caramel spun into fine threads. This dish, he said, reminds us that sweetness means little without contrast. Bitterness teaches us to appreciate the good. Clara's voice trembled. You're very kind, considering how we treated you. Evan met her gaze calmly. Change never happens through shame, only understanding. For the first time that night, she looked at him not as a server, not as someone below her, but as a person. When the plates were cleared, Richard exhaled slowly. We were wrong, he admitted quietly. I didn't realize how much bias hides in the little things. That's why I do this, Evan said. Because the small things, the tone, the assumptions, become the systems that define us. The room was still. No one spoke. The Westons had stopped being the villains of a dinner scene. They were now part of something larger, a lesson quietly unfolding in real time. When Michael returned with their bill, Richard handed him a credit card without a word and added a generous tip. He turned to Evan. Thank you, he said softly. Truly. Evan nodded once. You're welcome. But his work wasn't done. He didn't just want to change one table. He wanted to change the industry. And as he looked around the room, at Maya standing a little taller, at Liam watching with admiration, at Marisol peeking from the kitchen with a proud smile, Evan knew this night had sparked something no policy alone could ever achieve. It was only the beginning. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the city like a quiet promise. Inside the restaurant, the air felt lighter than it had in weeks. Staff moved with a strange new confidence, the kind that comes after witnessing truth spoken out loud. Evan sat alone in the private dining room, surrounded by open folders, graphs, and handwritten notes. Each page represented another story like the one from last night. Different faces, same patterns. He had seen this across the country, but never had it crystallized so sharply as it had at table 12. Michael entered carrying 2 coffees. They came back this morning, he said, setting a cup beside Evan. The Westons left a handwritten note. Evan raised an eyebrow. Really? Michael nodded and handed it over. The stationery was embossed, the handwriting elegant. Dr. Brooks, thank you for your patience last night. We saw ourselves through your eyes and didn't like what we found. We're meeting with our company's HR team to address unconscious bias in our offices. You opened our eyes. Evan read the letter twice, then folded it carefully. Interesting, he said. Sometimes transformation starts where humiliation ends. Michael smiled. You really think they'll change? Maybe, Evan said. But what matters is everyone who watched. They saw that dignity can be louder than anger. That will echo. At noon, the restaurant staff gathered for a meeting. Charts projected onto the wall showed data points Evan had collected over his 6-week investigation. Employee retention curves, complaint ratios, customer satisfaction changes. The numbers don't lie, Evan said, pacing slowly. When staff feel valued and safe, performance rises. Turnover drops. But when bias goes unchecked, it costs us not just morally but financially. Every lost employee costs over $5,000 in training and recruitment. Multiply that by a year and this restaurant alone loses hundreds of thousands. Maya raised her hand. What about the customers who complain when we stand our ground? Evan smiled faintly. Those are the ones we need to teach, not appease. We'll create guidelines for that too. No one should have to trade their dignity for a tip. Chef Marisol leaned forward. So what happens next? Evan clicked to the next slide. 5 new policies, he said. 1, zero tolerance for discriminatory treatment. 2, staff empowerment to refuse disrespectful service without penalty. 3, transparent reporting of incidents. 4, regular diversity and empathy training. And 5, public accountability through our website and community outreach. A quiet murmur spread through the room. Michael glanced around, impressed. You're changing the rules. Evan shook his head. We're restoring balance. Respect should have been the rule from the start. A hand went up from the back, Liam's. And training? You mentioned new development programs? Yes, Evan said. Starting next month, 3 employees per year will receive full scholarships for sommelier certification. My firm will sponsor them. Liam, your name is already on the list. Liam's eyes widened. Me? You've got potential, Evan said. You just need confidence and knowledge. That's how you turn fear into mastery. Maya's voice trembled slightly. And what about me? You'll be our new diversity coordinator, Evan said simply. You'll oversee communication and guest relations. With proper pay and authority, she blinked, then broke into a grin. I don't know what to say. Say you'll help keep this place honest, Evan said. Chef Marisol clapped her hands together. I'll build an educational tasting menu, she said. Each dish tells a story about culture and respect. A dinner where food becomes a bridge, not a weapon. Evan nodded. Do it. Let's make this restaurant a symbol of what hospitality should mean. Weeks passed and word began to spread. Reviews poured in, not just about the food but the atmosphere. Guests wrote about how the staff seemed alive, engaged, proud. Incidents of complaint dropped to 0. Local newspapers started calling it the Brooks effect. Evan didn't care about fame. What mattered was watching people grow, seeing Maya handle tense situations with calm authority, Liam studying wine varietals late into the night, Marisol smiling wider than she had in years. One evening, as the restaurant buzzed with warmth and laughter, a familiar pair walked through the door. Richard and Clara Weston. Every head turned again. But this time there was no tension, only curiosity. They approached Evan at the host stand. Clara spoke first. We came to make reservations for your next education dinner. 2 seats if you'll have us. Evan regarded them quietly, then nodded. Of course. Everyone deserves a second course, Clara smiled nervously. We read your report. You were right about us, about everything. Richard extended his hand. We're sponsoring a hospitality scholarship in your name, for students from underrepresented backgrounds. It's the least we can do. Evan shook his hand. Thank you, he said simply. Change isn't about apology, it's about contribution. Later that night, as the Westons enjoyed their meal, Marisol stepped out to address the dining room. Our next educational event sold out in 2 days, she announced proudly. Even the mayor's office called for seats. Laughter and applause rippled through the crowd. Evan watched quietly from the corner, jotting a note in his worn black book. Respect replicates itself when given space to breathe. He didn't notice Daniel Park, the food critic, snapping a photo of the moment for his next column. The headline the next day would read, From Division to Dignity, How One Dinner Changed an Industry. But for now, Evan just wanted to savor the silence that comes when harmony replaces noise. Months passed, and what began as a quiet moment of confrontation inside one restaurant spread far beyond its walls. Other establishments across the city started reaching out to Evan, asking for guidance. Chefs, owners, even hotel directors wanted to know how he had managed to turn a single night of tension into a movement of change. He didn't advertise it. The story carried itself. Through whispers, through articles, through the simple retelling of what had happened at Table 12. People didn't remember the argument anymore. They remembered how it ended, with respect. Soon Evan's consulting firm was flooded with calls. Restaurants in Chicago, New York, and San Francisco all wanted the same transformation. He called it the 5 Pillars program, rooted in the lessons he had learned through years of quiet observation. He returned to the restaurant one crisp morning, the city still waking outside. The staff were preparing for another day, moving in practiced harmony. It felt different now, lighter, freer. The energy in the building was no longer fear. It was pride. Marisol greeted him at the door with her apron still dusted with flour. "The first cultural dinner sold out in 12 minutes, she said, beaming. "We even have a waiting list." Maya followed, carrying a clipboard. "The incident log," she said, placing it on the counter. "It's been empty for 63 days. Evan smiled softly. "That's the best data I've ever seen." As he walked through the restaurant, he paused by the wine racks. Liam was studying a bottle, murmuring flavor notes to himself, his confidence solid now. "How's the training?" Evan asked. "Almost finished," Liam said, grinning. "Next month I'll be certified." "I couldn't have done it without you." "You did it," Evan said. "I just reminded you that you could." That evening, the restaurant hosted a private gathering, owners from across the region, journalists, and hospitality leaders. They wanted to hear from the man whose quiet defiance had sparked an industry-wide reflection. Evan stepped to the front of the room, the same notebook in his hand. It was no longer blank pages and fresh ink. It was full, its edges worn from being opened and closed hundreds of times. "When I first walked into this restaurant," he began, "I wasn't here to expose anyone. I was here to listen. Every note in this book represents someone's story. Every moment of humiliation, every quiet triumph, every step toward change." He glanced around the room. What happened here wasn't about punishment. It was about possibility. We can't erase prejudice overnight, but we can teach through example. Respect, once practiced consistently, becomes contagious. As he spoke, the room grew completely still. Even the servers paused in the doorway to listen. "Hospitality," Evan continued, "isn't about hierarchy. It's about humanity. The best service doesn't come from fear of a complaint. It comes from mutual dignity. When we remember that, the industry thrives. When we forget, it corrodes." Applause filled the space, rising slowly until it became thunderous. Afterward, James Hale, a prominent restaurant owner, approached him. "We're implementing your 5 pillars across all our locations," he said. "You've started something bigger than you realize." Evan smiled faintly. "That's the goal. Quiet change that lasts." Later that night, when the last guest had left and the lights had dimmed, Evan sat alone at the same table where it had all begun. Table 12. He rested his hand on its smooth surface, remembering the sound of Clara's voice, Richard's indignation, his own restraint. He wasn't angry anymore. He was grateful. Without them, the conversation would never have started. His phone buzzed, a message from Clara Weston. "We wanted you to know that our company just launched a diversity mentorship program. We named it the Brooks Initiative." Evan stared at the message for a long moment, then smiled. "Good," he murmured. "That's how change works. It multiplies." Months later, his book hit the shelves. Serving Change, Transforming Hospitality from the Inside Out. It opened with a single line, one that every reader underlined. Respect should not be earned through status. It should be the foundation for how we treat one another. As the book climbed to bestseller lists, interviews followed. He spoke not just about restaurants, but about workplaces, schools, and communities. Each story returned to one truth, that small acts of dignity can shift entire systems. In one interview, a journalist asked, "Do you ever think about that night at the restaurant?" Evan smiled. "Every day. Because it proved that a single act of quiet composure can echo louder than 1,000 arguments. And somewhere, in a corner of that same city, Table 12 remained open every evening, its white linen freshly pressed, its crystal glasses polished until they caught every glint of light. Guests came and went, unaware that the most important thing ever served there wasn't a dish but a lesson. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about pride. It was about one man who refused to meet hate with anger, and instead answered it with excellence, and in doing so, he taught the world that true service, like true respect, isn't about who's sitting at the table. It's about who we choose to be while standing beside it. The story of that single dinner didn't just live inside restaurants anymore. Universities began teaching it in ethics classes. News anchors quoted Evan's words. And in cities far beyond Boston, hospitality workers started whispering his name as both symbol and inspiration. He hadn't meant for it to become this large. His only goal had been fairness, but fairness, once spoken clearly, resonated everywhere. It reminded people of their own hidden humiliations, their quiet strength, their longing for dignity. One evening, nearly a year after that night, Evan stood in a glass-walled conference hall overlooking the river. He was about to speak at an international forum on leadership and equality. Hundreds of people filled the seats, some from hotels, some from schools, others from corporate offices. When he walked onto the stage, the applause was deafening. He waited until the sound quieted, then spoke in his calm, measured tone. People often ask me if that night at table 12 was planned. He began. It wasn't. It was instinct. The instinct to stay calm when disrespected, to stand when silence felt safer, and to teach when anger would have been easier. He paused, letting the stillness stretch until the room leaned closer. Every person in this room has power, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that rewrites what others believe is acceptable. You don't need a title or a platform to begin. You only need to choose composure over rage, truth over comfort, and respect over ego. The crowd listened without a whisper. His voice carried not just authority but lived experience. Change doesn't always roar, he continued. Sometimes it begins in a whisper, in the quiet decision not to shrink when someone tries to make you smaller. A single spotlight glowed against his face. We all serve someone. In business, in families, in friendship. Service isn't submission, it's awareness. It's how humanity survives its own arrogance. The audience rose to their feet, the sound of their applause echoing through the hall. Cameras flashed. Journalists scribbled notes. But Evan's gaze found a small group near the back, Maya, Liam, Marisol, and Michael. They had flown in to see him speak. All four stood together, beaming with pride. Later, after the crowd dispersed, they gathered outside under the city lights. Marisol handed him a small envelope. "From all of us," she said. Inside was a photograph of the team standing behind table 12. On the back they'd written, "You didn't just change our restaurant. You changed how we see ourselves." Evan looked up, his eyes soft. "You changed it too," he said. "All I did was start the conversation." They stood together for a long while, the night breeze moving gently around them. Cars hummed in the distance. Somewhere across the river, music floated from an open window. The city had kept moving, but something deep within its rhythm had shifted. A week later, he returned to the restaurant alone. It was late after closing, and the air carried the faint scent of vanilla and oak. He walked past empty tables until he reached the one that had started it all. Table 12. He sat down, resting his palms on the smooth surface. The same tablecloth, the same flickering candlelight. Only now peace lived where tension once had. He opened his notebook, now thick with pages, and added one final line, lesson complete. The dining room of the world is still full, but more of us are learning to eat with grace. He closed the book, set it gently on the table, and looked around the quiet room. The chairs, the glassware, the faint shimmer of candlelight, all of it felt alive, as if the space itself understood what had been born here. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he stood, buttoned his coat, and walked toward the door. At the exit, he paused and turned off the last light. The room fell into darkness, but it wasn't empty. It carried something invisible yet powerful, an echo of transformation. The kind that begins with a single act of restraint and ends with a world redefined by respect. And as Evan stepped out into the cool night air, he realized something simple but eternal. The real lesson wasn't just what he had taught others, it was what the experience had taught him. That true greatness isn't about commanding a room. It's about changing its atmosphere, one breath, one word, one act of dignity at a time.